A lot of what we've been hearing recently is sort of this surge of female candidates running for Congress and for governor and other offices. I want to focus particularly on the House of Representatives tonight, mostly because that's what I think is most interesting, but also because there's more of them and the houses are more dynamic in lots of ways. And the first obvious thing is that I'll put out here is sort of the problem with saying a pink wave and using pink to talk about women, but I sort of own it a little bit here just to take back it and reclaim it a bit. But what I think is important is to give some context to this conversation we're hearing about the pink wave. Women are going to take over Congress. They're going to take over the House in a way we haven't been able to before. And I think words of caution as we evaluate what's going to happen on November 6th is really, really useful here. So the question first is, are women at the gates? To give a little bit of context in history, right now for the House of Representatives, we've seen a record-breaking amount of women secure a major party nomination. This is not just women who are incumbents, but 183 women who now have secured a nomination that were not already in Congress. That's a huge number. And so we go back and look at a little bit about not how this started, but where we started to see kind of an increase, and it goes back to 1992. Now, some of you may be saying, well, Chod, you did a tip talk about 1992 last spring, so why are you doing it again? Still important to give some context. So in 1992, we call it the Year of the Woman. This is where we saw 106 women secure a major party nomination in the House. And while this picture is showing some of the female senators elected in that year, we still see, one of my favorite things about this picture is all of these young women sitting here watching these women come out of the Capitol. What does it mean to see women succeed in American politics at a high level? It means a lot. Now the question is, what about 1992 had this sort of surge in women securing the nomination? Well, it's been argued that it is this woman here, Anita Hill, who we've heard a little bit more about her recently if you weren't familiar, because this picture probably looks reminiscent to this picture that we just saw a few weeks back. So just to go back for a minute in case we aren't familiar, Anita Hill was giving testimony in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee alleging that Clarence Thomas had sexually harassed her in their workplace. And it divided the country along gender lines, but not necessarily partisan lines. And what we saw in the past few weeks is that this turned out quite differently. It didn't divide us among gender lines in the way it did before, but it did divide us among partisan lines. And that's important as we continue to move forward with the conversation. So, okay, 92 was a great year. Hoo-hoo! Hooray! We'll, give women a seat at the table. But did we stay there? Well, the Center for American Women in Politics out of Rutgers is sort of the place for data on women in American politics over time. And so this is my feeble attempt at a graph with data compiled. And so we see here this stark increase from 1990 in the Year of the Woman in 1992. Goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down a little bit, but we're hit a pretty good spot, 167 in 2016. So maybe women have their chance of really kind of breaking through, and particularly in the House, if this is about the House of Representatives, getting some more seats in the chamber. Well, what about right now? What is it that's going on right now where we have this record-breaking year? And I'm going to argue that there's a couple of things happening right now. Before we talk about the women who secured the nomination, you have to start with running in the first place, or declaring to run in the first place. Now, the literature tells us, by and large, the hardest obstacle for a woman is not the winning, it's the running. Women win at the same rate as men, but they run much less. So what is it that got them to run? And we'll talk about 3 reasons in just a minute. Now, you may notice here a lot more blue than red. Not necessarily surprising. We know the gender gap is real. We know that women are more represented by the Democratic Party, find themselves in the Democratic Party. But we still see a nice increase for Republican women filing to run. So this is a really, really big deal. Now we see where we land. So the 235 here, now through the primary season, 235 women have a major party nomination running in the House of Representatives. This is incumbents, women who are already in, and then the 183 women that I mentioned before. Still, we see a disproportionate representation of Democrats running as opposed to Republicans. So you may be thinking, 235? Oh my gosh, we did it. It's amazing. But the question is, but is it party time? I'm not so sure, right? This is what you're hearing. The media is like, the pink wave is coming, and women are storming the gates, and it's finally happened for them. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how American politics works, which is why I wish more political scientists were on television, but that's a whole separate conversation for another day. So what is really going on? And we're going to get to the here's what in just a minute. But the first thing is, why now? What is going on in 2018? Well, as I argued, there's three things. And the first of which has to do with our current president. One of my favorite things about this picture, if you notice, is that little sign right there. This was a while back, but saying, hey, the midterms are coming, right? So this argument that there's a movement happening, that women are, what does it say here, the foot soldiers and emerging leaders of a two-pronged effort. And the first has to do with the resistance to the Trump presidency and what his rhetoric and privilege represent. I can't sit back anymore. I have to do something instead of just complaining and feeling disenchanted and maybe even just voting. I have to do more than that. It's incumbent upon me to do more than just that. The second part has to do with the Me Too era. Now, because the Kavanaugh hearing and Dr. Ford's allegations comes after we're into the primary season, we kind of bracket that out but talk about the Me Too movement more generally. That it is not just about who's in the White House, it's who's running the country. It's the hierarchy, it's the patriarchy, it's the privilege. We need a seat to challenge it. We can't do it from the outside, we have to do it from the inside. And all of this leads to a disenchantment with where we are, with the state of the nation, okay? That this increase, women are much more pessimistic about our future, whereas men are marginally more optimistic, right? Well, so what do we do then? If these three things are happening, again, is it just enough to sit back? No, now women are saying, I'm gonna ask for my seat at the table. I'm gonna do it now. If not now, when? So then it's like, okay, well, if women are running, women vote for women, right? So do women vote in November? Are women going to actually vote? Here's one place where women actually have a bit of an advantage in the American electoral system. Women vote more than men in national elections. Now, what you might be asking me, Chod, you always tell me to compare apples to apples. What about midterm elections? Women still do turn out more than men in midterm elections. Different kind of women, maybe, but women still do turn out more than men. Okay, but don't women always vote for women? Because, you know, women are monolithic, right? We don't have nuance. We just vote for the one that looks like us, right? So we're just going to vote for women. So if we vote more and we're pissed and women are running more, hooray, right? We're going to get women in Congress at a rate we've never seen before. But again, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how American politics operates and why you're not hearing that whole story played out in the media, but you get it here tonight. So here's where we get a little sad. I often have students tell me they leave my classes feeling sad, and I feel bad about that. But at least it's better. You're educated at least, and you have the whole story. Party trumps gender. Full stop. Party is the thing that predicts how people vote in American politics. Again, full stop. No matter who the candidate is, for the most part. To give you an example, a recent poll from Political and Morning Consult last week said Republican women, 84% of Republican women approve of President Trump. And this was last week. This is post-Kavanaugh, right? I mean, this is Republican women overwhelmingly support this president. And you might be asking, but I don't understand, how does that happen, right? Because of party, because party's the thing, okay? Let's look at this a little deeper. Political scientists have argued, hey, guess what? Women aren't monolithic. Oh, who knew, right? Intersectionality, right? That word. My GWS class is here. Woohoo, intersectionality, right? Women are influenced not by gender alone. Yes, the gender of the candidate matters to women. However, what matters more is party and education, geography, income, race, and ethnicity. The things that we know matter for male voters, guess what? They also matter for female voters. Who would have known? So what does this look like exactly? Well, we go to the 2016 exit polls to get a little bit of a sense. Because we have to look at the interaction, we can't just look at gender. Let's look at race and gender. So I've heard my students say to me over and over again, oh man, white women, what'd you do? What did you do, right? Yes, we know that this interaction of race and gender did help us understand a little bit more about who became president, particularly white. Well, we'll look at more interactions in a minute. But women of color overwhelmingly vote for the Democratic candidate, regardless of the gender of the candidate. And in this particular election, white women did vote more with the Republican candidate than we had seen before. But it's not just about the interaction of race and gender. We also have to look at marital status. Married women also tend to vote Republican as opposed to Democratic, where you see a huge, unmarried women, 63% of unmarried women voted for Hillary Clinton as opposed to 47% of married women that voted for Trump. So you see that Clinton did just barely beat him, right? But if you look at the percent of the electorate in that election from the exit poll and you add it all up, that looks like a pretty nice little amount there for President Trump. We look at one thing, the one predictor actually in the last election that we know had one of the biggest effects, right, is education. So we look at educations of whites by sex, those three big predictors. And we see here that education is a huge predictor. When you interact it with race and with sex, it tells us a lot about for whom these voters are going to vote. And so just like we've done with male voters, we look at the same thing with female voters and say, okay, maybe we get a little bit of a clearer sense why certain kinds of women voted for President Trump, because those types of women tend to vote for Republican candidates overall. Oh, so what does this mean? Are women going to enter the gates, right? If women vote more in midterms, but depending on the kind of woman, they may or may not vote for the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate, and the Democratic candidates tend to be women more than the Republican candidates, what does it all mean? Well, we want to take a little snapshot of the 183 challengers, women challengers who are running in the House. I wanted to take a look at three different categories and one race for each one. So the Cook Political Report, nonpartisan organization that evaluates congressional districts to look at how Republican or Democratic they are, to help inform us on whether a district is likely to go one way, toss up, and so forth. So of those 183 challengers, 12 women running are likely to win. 12 are in safe districts. So we can say with some certainty we're going to get 12 more women in these districts. Ilhan Omar is running in the Minnesota 5th. She's a Somali refugee. She was the first Somali ever elected as a legislator. This is again in Minnesota. And she became the assistant minority leader in her first term. She just got elected in 2016 and started serving in 2017. She represents pretty much Minneapolis, right? So CPVI, the Cook PVI, is D plus 26, which means that district is 26 percentage points higher than the national average for the Democratic presidential candidate. The blue is basically what this means, okay? She's going to become our first Somali to win a House seat, and refugee for that. So now we look at 55 of the women are in competitive races. If you're doing math, you're like, oh God, what's coming next, right? 55 women are in competitive races. We look at Amy McGrath, who's running in the Kentucky 6th. Fighter pilot, first female fighter pilot from Kentucky, raised in Kentucky, has a family there. She's taking on an incumbent named Andy Barr. Now, you may ask, okay, well, so what does this district look like? Why is it competitive? Because, oh, that looks pretty red, right? Oh, wait, how is this a competitive race? The Cook PVI is R plus 9. But guess what? That district is 73% urban. And it has flip-flopped back and forth between the parties since 1973. And we have a very qualified challenger. We don't know what's going to happen in this race, but it's definitely competitive. So again, you may be asking, oh, what's the third category? 116 women who are running are unlikely to win. Of the 183, 116 are running in districts that are overwhelmingly Republican. So when you hear about the pink wave and all of these women that are going to be winning, we have to wonder. So we look at Nancy Soderberg. She's running in the Florida 6th, which is like southern Jacksonville into Daytona. She worked for the Clinton administration as one of his top national security advisors. She helped him craft foreign policy. She comes with a lot of experience, but she worked for Clinton, so she comes with a lot of baggage. You could argue she's super qualified, but she's running in a district that has an R plus 7, which is not a lot, but this district has been represented by Republicans since 1989. So what does this mean if 116 women are unlikely to win? Do we feel sad? We feel cry, right? Haha, I can't leave you on that note, right? Like Dr. Muck said, you got to get something happy at the end to take us out with, right? There is good news. We have seen an increase over the past couple of electoral cycles of more women running, more women of color running, and more men of color running, disproportionately running in the Democratic Party, to the point where right now in the current House caucus, Democratic caucus, women currently make up 32% of the Democratic House caucus, and men make up about 39%, white men. With all the women who are running, if there's a good amount of them that win, there could be more women than men in the Democratic caucus in the House. We're getting closer. Even if you don't get it this time, the role model effect is real. And more women could run and take over and be the majority in the Democratic caucus. More women of color are running than ever before. We've got 4 women, these 4 women in particular, who are expected to win their races, one of which because she's running unopposed, Anna Presley. But that's not, in her primary, she ousted the incumbent. Right? That's a big deal. So we have a huge spike in women of color who are running. And this matters. This matters a lot. And so I can't say it as well as Ayanna Pressley says it when she talks about representation. She's asked about, well, how do you feel about being a woman of color who's running? What does that mean? And she says, it does matter. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter for the reason you think it matters. It's not about descriptive representation. You look like me, I look like you, hoo-hoo, we won, right? It's not about that. It's about who's at the table, the voices that are being heard, the issues that are being raised, right? The challenge to how things have always been, to get those people in a room and have a seat at that table. That's why it matters. And the most important thing to leave all of you with tonight has to do with your voice, your individual voice. What she says is you cannot have a government formed by the people if it is not represented by all of the people. That is your job. I don't care for whom you vote. I just want you to have your voice heard so the people that are in there that you choose can represent you so you're represented by all the people. Thank you.